The number appeared on every screen across the coalition base, and nobody spoke for a long time. 47 million. Admiral Yenix read the intelligence report 3 times because surely there had been a mistake. The Cravathi swarm had deployed 47 million ground troops to take this moon. His defending force numbered 12,000 soldiers. The math was not complicated. It was simply impossible. Around the command center, officers from 6 different species processed the information in their own ways. The Pelians, small and fragile creatures with skin like paper, began crying softly. The Chitauri scouts clicked their mandibles in what passed for prayer among their kind. The Morden heavy troops, massive beings adapted for underwater combat, stood absolutely still as their gills fluttered with stress. And in the corner, doing maintenance work on a communications relay, because that was all the coalition trusted him to do, one human looked up from his tools. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Reeves had spent 8 months on this moon watching aliens train for wars while they told him his species was too primitive for real combat. Humans had only joined galactic society 11 years ago. They were newcomers, children playing at civilization while the grown-up species handled serious matters. He was 34 years old. He had grown up on a ranch in Montana where the winters killed anything weak and the summers burned everything else. He had served in 3 wars on Earth before the aliens came. He had buried friends in sand and snow and mud. And now he watched sophisticated alien soldiers calculate their surrender terms. Reeves set down his tools and walked toward the command table. Several officers looked at him with confusion. The human maintenance worker had no business in strategic discussions. "Admiral," Reeves said, "I would like to see the defensive perimeter maps." Yenix turned all 4 of his eyes toward the human. The Admiral was a Theshan, a species known for their logical thinking and complete lack of emotional response. Even so, something like pity crossed his face. "Sergeant Reeves, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this situation is beyond salvage. The evacuation ships will arrive in 6 days. We must simply survive until then." "That is exactly what I intend to help with, sir." "You do not understand." Yenix gestured at the screens showing enemy positions. "The Cravathi have deployed their full planetary assault force. We have analyzed every possible defensive scenario. There is no configuration of our 12,000 troops that can hold against 47 million for 6 days." "Then stop thinking about your 12,000 troops," Reeves said. "Think about what one human can do." A Chitauri officer made a sound that translated roughly as bitter laughter. "One human? Against 47 million? This is not the time for primitive bravado, Earthling." Reeves did not look at the officer. He kept his eyes on Admiral Yenix. "Sir, my species has been fighting wars since before we could write. We have 10,000 years of practice at killing each other in creative ways. We got so good at it that we nearly destroyed our own planet. Twice." He paused. "You people have been watching me fix broken equipment for 8 months because you thought humans were too uncivilized for combat. You were right. We are uncivilized. We are brutal and stubborn, and we do not know when to quit." Yenix studied him. "What are you proposing?" "Give me the maps. Give me access to the weapons depot. Give me 12 hours. Then let me show you what my species learned at places called Thermopylae and Rorke's Drift and Bostonia." "I do not know these words." "They were battles, sir. Battles where small numbers of humans held against impossible odds. Not because we had better technology or smarter tactics, but because we simply refused to accept that the math said we should lose." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Around the room, alien officers exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical, some looked curious. A young Pelian engineer named Sovan watched the human with wide silver eyes. "Sergeant Reeves," Yenix said finally, "even if I believed you capable of making a difference, you are one soldier. The Cravathi have 47 million. One cannot matter against such numbers." Reeves smiled then, and something about that smile made Sovan step backward. "Admiral, let me tell you about a man named Simo Heha. He was a farmer from Finland, a country on Earth. During a war in 1939, the enemy invaded with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Simoheha went into the snow with a rifle. In 100 days, he killed over 500 enemy soldiers, by himself. The enemy was so terrified of him that they called him the White Death and bombed entire forests trying to kill him. Reeves leaned forward. That was, with primitive weapons almost 1,000 years ago, I have better equipment, I have your terrain maps, and I have something Simoheha did not have. He pointed at the screens showing the Cravathi forces, an enemy that has never faced a human who actually wanted to fight. Admiral Yenix made his decision. Give him the maps, he said. Give him whatever he needs. As Reeves walked toward the tactical station, Sovan hurried after him. Sergeant, the young Pelion said, do you truly believe you can make a difference? The numbers are. Terrifying, Reeves finished. I know that is exactly what we are counting on. He began downloading terrain data to his personal display. The Cravathi have never lost a ground war. They calculate everything. Troop numbers, supply lines, casualty projections. They are very good at math. He looked at Sovan with eyes that had seen too many friends die. They have no idea that humans are very good at breaking math. Outside the base walls, the first Cravathi scouts appeared on the horizon. 2 million soldiers in the vanguard alone. Daniel Reeves loaded his rifle and walked toward the gate. The war was about to learn what one human could do. The Cravathi moved across the ash plains like a living carpet of death. 2 million soldiers in perfect formation, their chitinous armor catching the pale light of the distant sun. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Mathematics was on their side. From the observation tower, coalition soldiers watched them come. Some prayed, some wept. A Morden heavy trooper simply sat down and began recording a final message to his family. Daniel Reeves was cleaning his rifle. Sovan stood beside him, trying to understand how any creature could be so calm in the face of extinction. The young Pelion engineer had never seen combat. His species solved problems with equations and careful planning. The approaching army represented a problem with no solution. You are not afraid, Sovan said. It was not a question. I am terrified, Reeves replied without looking up. Fear is normal. Fear keeps you alive. The trick is not letting it make your decisions for you. He finished with the rifle and stood, walking to a display screen showing Cravathi troop movements. For hours he had studied their patterns, their communication methods, their tactical doctrine. Tell me about the hive signal, he said. Sovan blinked his silver eyes. The Cravathi share a psychic network. All orders flow from command units to squad leaders to individual soldiers. It allows perfect coordination across millions of troops. And if the squad leaders die, the soldiers beneath them experience temporary confusion until new squad leaders are designated. Perhaps 30 seconds of disruption. Reeves smiled that unsettling smile again. What happens if a lot of squad leaders die at the same time? Sovan had never considered this question. He pulled up data on his tablet and ran calculations. His thin fingers began to shake. If enough squad leaders are eliminated simultaneously, the cascade disruption could cause. I do not have a word for this. Mass panic. Loss of coordination across entire divisions. Now you are thinking like a human. Reeves picked up a long black case from beside his equipment. Inside was a weapon that Sovan did not recognize. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. On Earth, we used it to kill enemy soldiers from 2,000 meters away. Your Cravathi friends have never faced anything like it. A Chitauri scout approached them, mandibles clicking with skepticism. Primitive projectile weapons cannot penetrate Cravathi chitin armor. We have studied their defenses extensively. Only plasma weaponry has any effect. Reeves did not argue. He simply walked to the firing range at the base perimeter, set up a piece of Cravathi armor that had been recovered from a previous battle, and stepped back exactly 2,000 meters. The shot was impossibly loud. The Cravathi armor exploded into fragments. Your plasma weapons burn through chitin, Reeves said as he walked back. My rifle hits with so much force that the chitin shatters. The energy has to go somewhere. It goes into the body behind the armor. He looked at the stunned Chitauri. I will teach your scouts how to use weapons like this. We have 3 hours before they reach firing range. For the next 3 hours, Reeves worked without rest. He trained teams of Chitauri scouts in ambush positioning, explaining concepts they had never encountered. Overlapping fields of fire, psychological warfare, making the enemy afraid to advance. He showed them footage from Earth wars, images of small groups holding against overwhelming force. The defenders of Stalingrad, the Marines at Chasin Reservoir, the soldiers at Rorke's Drift who fought through the night against thousands. Your species fights to win, he told them. My species fights to make winning so painful that the enemy wishes they had never started. Admiral Yenix observed from a distance, still uncertain whether the human was brilliant or insane. Probably both, he decided. When the Cravathi vanguard reached the outer defense perimeter, they expected to sweep through token resistance. Coalition forces always retreated from superior numbers. It was logical. It was sensible. Instead, they walked into a killing field. Reeves had positioned himself on elevated ground with clear sight lines to the approaching army. Through his scope, he identified squad leaders by their slightly different armor markings. He began firing. The first squad leader dropped, then the second, then 20 more in rapid succession. Below, the Chitauri scout teams opened fire from hidden positions, targeting the leaders that Reeves marked for them. The Cravathi formation, so perfect moments ago, began to stutter. Confusion spread through the hive signal like poison. Soldiers waited for orders that never came. New squad leaders were designated, and they died within seconds of receiving command. In the first hour, 847 Cravathi fell. More importantly, 112 squad leaders were eliminated, creating cascade disruptions across the entire vanguard. The 2 million-strong force stopped advancing. They had expected resistance to crumble. They had expected fear and surrender. They had not expected to face something that hunted their commanders with mechanical precision. From the coalition walls, soldiers watched in disbelief. A single human and a few scout teams were holding back an army that should have crushed them without slowing down. Sovan found Reeves reloading between shots, his hands steady despite the carnage below. "How are you doing this?" the Pelion whispered. "I am not doing anything special," Reeves said. "I am just applying 10,000 years of human experience at killing things that outnumber us." He fired again. Another squad leader fell. We had to get creative. Being outnumbered was kind of our default setting. As night fell on Draven 7, the Cravathi vanguard retreated to regroup. They had lost nearly 90,000 soldiers. Coalition losses were 4 Chitauri scouts who had moved too slowly from an ambush position. And 1 human who refused to sleep, studying maps for tomorrow, planning new ways to break the mathematics of war. In the command center, Admiral Yenix stared at the casualty reports. "This is impossible," he said. "No, sir," Sovan replied quietly. "This is human." Day 2 of the siege began with silence. The Cravathi had spent the night regrouping, replacing fallen squad leaders, trying to understand what had happened to their perfect invasion plan. Their tactical algorithms kept returning errors. No defensive force of 12,000 should have inflicted such casualties. The math was wrong. Daniel Reeves used the silence to teach. He gathered the coalition officers in the command center and pulled up maps of Earth, ancient maps showing battles that had shaped human history. "This is Vietnam," he said, pointing to a small country on the display. A superpower invaded with overwhelming force, superior technology, superior numbers. They lost because the defenders used the terrain, refused pitched battles, and made every meter of ground cost more blood than it was worth. He switched to another map. "This is Finland, 1939. The enemy had more soldiers, more tanks, more aircraft. The Finns had winter and stubbornness. They made the invaders pay for every frozen kilometer with bodies stacked like firewood. Admiral Yenix studied the maps with growing unease. Your species developed these tactics against each other. We had no choice. Humans spent most of our history fighting humans. We got very good at it. Reeves smiled grimly. The Cravathi think they understand war because they have conquered dozens of worlds, but they have never faced a species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing while outnumbered. He outlined his strategy for the day. No direct confrontation, hit-and-run tactics, harassment attacks that would prevent the Cravathi from establishing supply lines or resting their troops, make them exhausted, make them paranoid, make them afraid. A Morden officer raised one massive webbed hand. You speak of acceptable losses. This concept is disturbing to us. How many of our soldiers do you consider acceptable to sacrifice? As few as possible, Reeves said. But the question you should ask is different. How many enemy soldiers is each of our lives worth? If one coalition soldier can take 50 Cravathi with them, we win. If we can take 100, we win faster. The room fell silent. Such calculations felt obscene to species that valued individual lives above strategic math. I know this is hard to accept, Reeves continued. My species struggled with it too, but the Cravathi will not hesitate to spend lives to achieve their goals. If we want to survive, we must be willing to make their expenditure cost more than they can afford. Throughout the day, Reeves implemented his harassment strategy. Small teams struck at Cravathi positions and vanished before counterattacks could form. Supply convoys were ambushed in narrow valleys. Communication relays were destroyed, forcing the hive signal to route through damaged pathways. The Cravathi commander, a tactical genius by their standards, could not adapt quickly enough. Every solution created new problems, reinforced the supply lines, and the main force weakened. Hunt the ambush teams and the defensive perimeter strengthened. By sunset, another 40,000 Cravathi had died. Coalition losses numbered 12 soldiers total. That night, the Cravathi commander made a broadcast on all frequencies. Standard surrender demands. Lay down weapons, accept Cravathi rule, and the killing would stop. Reeves asked permission to respond. Admiral Yenix, still struggling to process the day's events, granted it. Cravathi forces, Reeves said into the communications array. This is Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Reeves of Earth. I'm going to teach you about a battle called Stalingrad. He spoke for 10 minutes. He described the siege that had killed over 1 million soldiers. He explained how defenders had held ruined buildings for weeks, fighting room by room, floor by floor, turning every pile of rubble into a fortress. He detailed the final casualty figures with cold precision. That was one city, he concluded. One city defending against an army that should have crushed it in days. The defenders held for 5 months. They held because they decided that the mathematics of surrender were unacceptable. He paused. You have 47 million soldiers. We have killed over 100,000 in 2 days. At this rate, you will run out of soldiers before our evacuation ships arrive. I suggest you do what the army at Stalingrad eventually did. Go home. The broadcast ended. In the Coalition Command Center, officers stared at the human with expressions ranging from horror to something like worship. Sovan approached Reeves hesitantly. Will they listen? Will they retreat? No, Reeves began checking his equipment for the night patrols. But now they know we are not afraid. That will make them afraid. Fear is a weapon too. The young Pelian studied the human's face, searching for some sign of doubt or exhaustion. He found neither. How do you carry this? Sovan asked. The killing, the calculation of lives, how does your mind not break? Reeves stopped what he was doing. For a moment, something painful flickered in his eyes. It does break, he said quietly. Every human soldier I have ever known carries cracks inside them. We just learn to keep functioning around the broken parts. He returned to his equipment check. There will be time to fall apart later. Right now, my job is keeping people alive. Dawn of Day 3 brought the Cravathi Hunter Cast, 50,000 elite soldiers bred specifically to kill high-value targets. They had identified the single human causing their losses, and they had been sent to eliminate him. Reeves looked at the intelligence report showing their approach and nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "That means I am working." He walked toward the armory, already planning traps that would turn the Cravathi elite into examples for their regular forces. Behind him, Sovan began calculating survival probabilities. The numbers were still impossible. But after 2 days of watching the human work, impossible had started to feel like a suggestion rather than a fact. Day 4 brought pain. Reeves found the 17th Hunter Cast assassination team in a drainage tunnel beneath the eastern wall. He had killed 16 such teams already, using traps that he called basic wilderness survival and that alien observers called horrifying genius. This team was smarter. They had learned from the deaths of their brothers. The plasma bolt caught him across the back as he was covering a Morden squad's retreat from a supply depot raid. The pain was extraordinary, like being branded with lightning. He dropped to one knee, rifle still raised, and killed the 3 hunters who had flanked him before they could fire again. When the Morden soldiers came back for him, they found him sitting against a wall, applying pressure to a wound that exposed muscle and bone. "Get back to base," Reeves said through clenched teeth. "Mission successful." They carried him anyway. The Morden were not gentle creatures, but they handled him like something precious, something irreplaceable. In the medical bay, Sovan watched the human medic robot assess the damage. Degree plasma burns across. 30% of his back, significant tissue loss. Recommended treatment, full sedation and regeneration therapy for 72 hours. Reeves sat up before the assessment finished. "I need field sutures and stimulant shots," he said. The Pelian doctor assigned to the base rushed forward, thin hands waving in alarm. "Sergeant, you require immediate intensive care. Your tissue damage is severe. Moving will cause permanent scarring and potential nerve damage." "Do you know what happens if I spend 72 hours in a regeneration pod?" Reeves looked at the doctor with eyes that had not closed in almost 80 hours. "The Cravathi learn that the person killing them is incapacitated. They press their attack. People die. But your health is less important than their lives." Reeves pointed at Sovan. "Come here. I am going to teach you something that human soldiers learned during a war called the Civil War almost 900 years ago." For the next hour, Reeves guided Sovan through field medicine techniques that made the Pelian doctor leave the room in distress. Stitching wounds without anesthesia, using chemical stimulants to override the body's pain responses, methods for staying functional when the body screamed for rest. "This is barbaric," Sovan whispered as he tied off the last suture. "This is survival." Reeves tested his range of motion, wincing but mobile. "My species has spent centuries learning how to keep fighting when we should be dead. The body can endure more than you think if the mind refuses to quit." He was walking toward the door when Admiral Yenix arrived with a communication tablet. "The Cravathi are attempting to negotiate," the Admiral said. "They have offered terms. Specifically, they want to speak with you." Reeves took the tablet. The Cravathi commander's image filled the screen, a massive creature with too many eyes and armor that glistened like oil. "Human," the commander said, "you have cost us greatly. We respect strength. We offer you a place in our ranks. Lead our ground forces. You will have power beyond anything your primitive species can offer." Reeves was quiet for a long moment. "I have a counteroffer," he said finally. "Go home, return to your families, tell them you met something on this moon that was not worth dying for." The Cravathi commander made a sound like grinding stones. "We do not have families. We have the swarm. The swarm does not retreat." "Then, the swarm will die here." Reeves handed the tablet back to Yenix. "Tell them my answer is no." After the communication ended, the Admiral studied the wounded human with something approaching wonder. "Why do you fight so hard for us?" Yenix asked. We dismissed you as primitive, we relegated you to maintenance work, we treated you as less than equal. Reeves leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every one of his 80 sleepless hours. Where I come from, we had a saying, no man left behind. He met the Admiral's 4 eyes. When I arrived on this moon, I was alone, a primitive human among sophisticated aliens. You could have sent me home. You could have abandoned me when the invasion began, but you did not. You let me stay. You treated me like part of the force, even if it was only to fix broken equipment. He straightened despite the pain in his back. That made you my people, and I do not leave my people behind. Admiral Yenix was silent for a long time. In his centuries of service, he had never encountered a species that formed bonds so quickly, so completely, with beings utterly unlike themselves. The evacuation ships will arrive in 44 hours, Yenix said finally. Can you hold? Reeves smiled despite everything. Admiral, I once knew a soldier who held a position for 3 days with a broken leg and no ammunition. He used rocks. When they found him, he was still throwing rocks. He walked toward the door, toward the walls, toward another night of hunting the hunters. 44 hours is nothing. Outside, the Cravathi had amassed 5 million fresh troops. Their Supreme Hive General had arrived personally, furious that one human had made a mockery of their invasion mathematics. Reeves looked at the massive army spread across the horizon and began calculating angles of fire. The numbers were still impossible. But impossible was just another problem to solve. 78 hours without sleep. Reeves knew the numbers because Sovan kept telling him, as if the young Pelian believed statistics might finally convince the human to rest. They would not. Rest was for after. Rest was for when the job was finished. His hands shook when he reloaded now. The stimulants were wearing off, and his body was beginning to understand that it had been pushed far beyond its limits. The wound on his back had reopened twice. The bandages were more red than white. None of it mattered. The evacuation ships would arrive in 16 hours, and 40 million Cravathi still stood between his people and survival. Day 5 began with the full planetary assault. The Supreme Hive General had abandoned subtlety. Assassination teams had failed. Harassment had failed. Tactical outmaneuvering had failed. Now there was only overwhelming force, the strategy that had conquered dozens of worlds. 20 million Cravathi advanced across all fronts simultaneously. They accepted catastrophic losses to overwhelm defensive positions. Bodies piled so high that living soldiers climbed over them to reach the walls. The coalition lines buckled. For the first time in 5 days, territory was lost. A supply depot fell, then a sensor array, then the Eastern Guard Tower. In the command center, Admiral Yenix watched his careful defenses crumble. We cannot hold, he said. The mathematics have finally caught up with us. Reeves stood at the tactical display, studying enemy positions with eyes that burned from exhaustion. He had expected this moment, had planned for it since day 1. Then we changed the mathematics, he said. He opened a communication channel to all Cravathi frequencies. His voice was broadcast across the entire battlefield, reaching millions of enemy soldiers and their command structure. This message is for the Cravathi swarm, he said. I am one human. One. In 5 days I have killed more of your kind than your entire species has lost in a century of conquest. I have destroyed your hunter caste. I have humiliated your commanders. I have made your perfect tactical algorithms look like children's games. He paused, letting the words sink in. There are 18 billion more of us on Earth. 18 billion humans who grew up learning the same tactics I used here. 18 billion beings who spent 10,000 years practicing war against each other, getting better with every generation. The Cravathi advance slowed. Soldiers paused, waiting for orders, trying to process what they were hearing. Do the math, Reeves continued. You have 40 million soldiers. You have lost 400,000 in 5 days against one human and a handful of aliens. What happens when you face a real human army? What happens when 18 billion of us decide that your swarm is a threat that needs to be eliminated? Static crackled across the channel. Go home, tell your hive general that this moon is not worth what it will cost. Tell your entire species that there are some worlds you should not try to take. Because if you continue this fight, you will not just lose this battle. You will teach humanity that you are an enemy worth exterminating. He closed the channel. Sovan stared at him. You are bluffing. Earth has no military fleet. Your species has barely begun exploring space. The Cravathi do not know that. Reeves pulled up the base schematics on his display. And it does not matter. I am not trying to win this war. I am trying to make winning so expensive that they never start another one against a human-allied world. He pointed to the Cravathi command post, visible as a heat signature 3 kilometers behind enemy lines. The Supreme Hive General is there. If I kill him, the cascade disruption will be massive. Millions of soldiers will experience simultaneous loss of command. It might buy enough time for evacuation. Admiral Yenix understood immediately. That is a suicide mission. You would have to cross 3 kilometers of enemy-held territory against millions of soldiers. Yes, you would die. Probably. The Admiral's 4 eyes studied the human. This creature had fought without rest for 5 days. He had taken wounds that would have incapacitated any other species. He had killed thousands personally and inspired the deaths of hundreds of thousands more. And now he proposed to throw away his life for aliens who had dismissed him as primitive. Why, Yenix asked. Reeves looked at the soldiers around the command center. Pelians who had learned to fight. Chitauri who had conquered their fear. Morden who had carried him when he fell. Species that had nothing in common except that they had survived together. Because someone has to go, he said simply, and I am the one who can reach him. He began gathering equipment. Grenades, explosives, every weapon he could carry. Sovan grabbed his arm. There must be another way. The numbers say you cannot survive. Reeves smiled at the young Pelian. It was not the unsettling combat smile. It was something warmer, something almost gentle. The numbers have said I could not survive since day 1. I stopped listening to them a long time ago. He walked toward the gate, ready to begin the final mission. Behind him, Admiral Yenix made a decision. Sergeant Reeves. Reeves turned. 40 coalition soldiers stood behind the Admiral. Pelians and Chitauri and Morden, armed and ready. If you go, Yenix said, we go. You taught us what humans call brotherhood. You do not get to die alone. For the first time in 5 days, Daniel Reeves did not know what to say. Admiral, the evacuation will happen whether we live or die. Our job now is to ensure you reach that command post. Yenix raised his weapon. You taught us that numbers only matter if you let them. 41 soldiers against 40 million. Let us show the Cravathi what they taught us. Reeves looked at the alien faces around him. Creatures he had trained, creatures he had protected, creatures who were now willing to die beside him. All right, he said finally, let us break some more math. 41 soldiers charged across open ground toward 2 million Cravathi. Every military calculation said they should die in seconds. The mathematics were absolute. 41 against 2 million produced exactly one outcome. The Cravathi were so confused that they almost forgot to shoot. Their hive intelligence had spent 5 days analyzing coalition tactics, defensive positions, ambush strategies, calculated retreats. Nothing in their processing had prepared them for enemies who simply ran at them, screaming, firing weapons that should not have been able to hurt them. Reeves led the charge. His rifle was empty within the first 100 meters, so he drew his sidearm. When that was empty, he used his combat knife. When the knife broke in Cravathi chitin, he used his fists and teeth and the desperate fury of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and nuclear weapons through sheer refusal to die. The coalition soldiers followed his example. Pelians who had never held weapons before this week threw themselves at enemies 10 times their size. Chitauri scouts clicked their war prayers and fought until their mandibles shattered. Morden heavy troops carved paths through the enemy with their massive claws, buying meters with their lives. The Cravathi command structure could not adapt. Orders conflicted. Soldiers hesitated, waiting for guidance that came too slowly. The Hive signal, designed for coordinated warfare against rational enemies, broke down when faced with opponents who behaved like madness given physical form. Reeves reached the command post with 7 soldiers still standing behind him. Blood covered every inch of his body, some his, most not. The Supreme Hive General stood before him, a creature of nightmare size, armored and ancient and utterly certain of victory. "You cannot win," the general said. "You are one human. I have killed thousands of species." Reeves smiled through broken teeth. "Then you have never killed a species that was already too stubborn to die." The fight lasted 11 seconds. Later, Coalition analysts would watch the footage repeatedly, trying to understand how a wounded, exhausted human could move that fast. They would conclude that it was not speed. It was simply the complete absence of hesitation. Every movement was attack. Every breath was violence. Every heartbeat was the rhythm of a species that had spent millennia learning to kill things bigger than itself. The Supreme Hive General fell, and across the battlefield, 18 million Cravathi experienced simultaneous loss of command. Panic spread through the Hive signal like fire. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Units scattered in random directions. The perfect coordination that had conquered worlds dissolved into chaos. When the evacuation ships arrived 4 hours later, they found Coalition survivors holding a perimeter around the command post. The Cravathi army had fragmented so completely that organized resistance was impossible. Evacuation proceeded with 97% of all personnel safely recovered. The highest survival rate in any contested evacuation in galactic history. On the transport ship, medics finally forced Reeves into a regeneration pod. He had fought for nearly 6 days without sleep. He had taken wounds that should have killed him 3 times over. His body required 2 weeks of intensive care before he could walk again. During those 2 weeks, the galaxy changed. Reports of the siege spread through Coalition channels. Other species learned that a single human had held against 47 million, had killed a Supreme Hive General in single combat, had inspired alien soldiers to fight with a ferocity they had never known they possessed. The numbers terrified everyone who heard them, not the Cravathi numbers, the human numbers. 1 human had done this. 1. Earth had 18 billion more. A year after the siege, the Galactic Coalition officially integrated human military forces into their command structure. Admiral Yenix personally recommended the change, citing tactical innovations that had revolutionized Coalition defensive doctrine. The Cravathi swarm sent diplomats instead of soldiers, their new Hive General chosen. After the chaos of Draven 7 proposed a non-aggression treaty. The terms were simple. Any species under human protection was to be considered off-limits for Cravathi expansion. The treaty was signed without negotiation. On the anniversary of the siege, a memorial was built on the Coalition capital world. The wall listed every soldier who had fallen at Draven 7. Beside each alien name was an Earth flag, placed there by Daniel Reeves, who had insisted that they be honored as his brothers and sisters regardless of species. Reeves stood before the wall, wearing his dress uniform for the first time since receiving it. Sovan stood beside him, no longer the frightened young engineer who had watched a human walk into impossible odds. "They are calling you a hero," Sovan said. "Every species in the Coalition knows your name." Reeves shook his head. "I am not a hero. I am just a soldier who refused to do the math." He touched one of the names on the wall. A Morden heavy trooper who had died covering the final charge to the command post. "They are the heroes. They followed a crazy human into certain death because I taught them that certain death is just another number to break." His voice grew quiet. "I did not save them. They saved themselves. I just showed them how." The memorial ceremony ended. Dignitaries and officials departed. but Reeves remained standing before the wall until the stars came out. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Cravathi were learning to fear a species they had once dismissed as primitive. Other hostile powers were reconsidering their expansion plans, and on worlds where Coalition soldiers served, the story of Draven 7 was told again and again. 1 human against 47 million. The numbers had terrified everyone. Not because they showed human weakness, because they showed what humans would do for the people they called family, because they proved that some creatures simply refused to accept that mathematics determined survival. Because in the end, the number that mattered was not 47 million. It was one. One human who stood up when standing was impossible. One human who fought when fighting was hopeless. One human who showed an entire galaxy that the only math that mattered was the equation written in courage and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. The galaxy had learned its lesson. When counting the odds against you, never count the humans. They break the math every time,